Hello, and welcome to Camp, Scary and Squee, a podcast that tests my theory that every horror movie exists on a scale of divine camp to pure terror. I'm your host Damien, and each week I'm joined by a guest who brings a horror movie for discussion, dissection, and classification on the Camp Scary scale. My guest this week describes his perfect horror movie as something that doesn't take itself too seriously, playing with the tropes of the genre, has gratuitous and hunky body shots, and at least one epic kill scene. Welcome, Dave McAuliffe. How are you doing?
I am doing really well, Damien, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on this week to talk about something very exciting. But before we get started, what has been haunting you this week?
Well, there's been a few things haunting me this week, Damien, and I was trying to decide which one. So I'm going to give you my top two. The first one being the hairstyles in Melbourne. It has been 2 months without hairdressers being open, and I'm glad, as I said, that this is a podcast and not a video cast because I'm not looking too good. My second one is my PhD.
Oh,
I've
God.
been I started a PhD in the last 3 months, and I'm at the point where I need to make a decision on the topic that will be my bedfellow for the next 3 years. So that's been scaring me.
Yeah, something that's just sort of hanging over you while you have to make a big decision.
Yes, exactly.
I want to give you the honors. What film have you chosen for us to talk about this week?
So this week we are talking about an Australian film called Little Monsters, and I will not apologize because it's an absolute film, absolutely great film, which I've now watched 3 times. Came out in 2019, but it's more of a rom-com dressed up as a zombie horror.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to put it. So, as you said, released in 2019, but some other quick stats. Written and directed by Abe Forsyth, starring Lupita Nyong'o, Alexander England, Kat Stewart, Diesel La Torroca, who's that kid that plays Felix, who's a bit of a powerhouse,
Yes, he is.
and Josh Gad, who is Teddy McGiggle. There's I couldn't find any financial information on this, so it has had quite
Ah,
quite strong critical success, but I could not tell you if it's been a financial success.
yeah, this is an interesting an interesting makeup of the cast because it's a mix of some people who are pretty much not well known or only known locally, and then some people who have done pretty well in their careers in the US, like Lupita. As in Star Wars, Black Panther, 12 Years a Slave. She's had such a great career. She's an amazing actress. Josh Gad as well has done quite a few quite a few Hollywood films and series. He's a great actor. So I actually found the mix of actors in this film quite strange.
Yeah, it is an interesting mix. Interesting, like because Josh Gad, many people would probably know from his time in the Book of Mormon as well, which is
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know if it was his breakout, but it was kind of where I first noticed him was, yeah, this, and he came and helped with the opening in Australia. So the first time I saw it was with
Mm,
him.
yeah. And did you see him in Avenue 5?
Avenue 5.
Yeah, Avenue 5, great series with Hugh Laurie, and it's a sci-fi, basically about a space shuttle for all these rich people who kind of go on what's supposed to be, I think, a 2-week space tour, and they get something goes wrong and they get stuck out there for 3 years. And Josh Gad plays the billionaire owner of the starship.
He does have like kind of a born into money character vibe that he can play quite
Yeah.
well. Uh, Before we kick off, I should share the IMDb description, which is a washed up musician teams up with a teacher and a kids' show personality to protect young children from a sudden outbreak of zombies. And a quick spoiler warning as well that we're about to talk about this film, and so we're probably going to talk about what happens. Uh, to get us started, I thought, since we no longer work together and no longer volunteer on committees together, for anyone who's looking for the history of how Dave and I know each other, we talk about film and TV a lot. I would say it's probably the topic that we go to when we catch up. But I should say our conversations often center around the men in the film and television that we're watching. So was Alexander England kind of your motivation for bringing this to us today?
Alexander England is definitely a motivation. He's definitely a motivation. I have to say, if for anyone listening, if you don't know who Alexander England, Google. But no, my motivation, and I came across this film. So I've been watching shows on Binge, and I don't know if you have Binge, but it has this really annoying feature that if you don't stop a film right when it finishes, it automatically goes onto something it randomly chooses for you. And most of the time, the random choices that it makes are pretty bad. And this was one that came up randomly, and I had forgotten to rush to stop it. And as soon as it started, it drew me in. And usually, it's rare that I find Australian films that draw me in straight away, and this one did. And so when you asked me to choose a film, I was going to go to kind of my classics like Scream and Alien and those films, and then I remember this film, and I thought, let's put an Aussie film in the mix, because it's rare that Aussie films get good accolades. So let's
bring it in. Well, as you said, like it really draws you in at the beginning, because the setup of this, it's not a traditional zombie film setup. The setup is the ending of a relationship, and it's quite kind of explosive. Public arguments. But it gives us a real sense of our main character. Also called Dave. I was like, I've written Dave, but that's your name. It's also his name.
It was. I have to say, one of the other things that drew me in is that he kept being referred to as Uncle Dave, and I'm Uncle Dave to my niece and nephew. So like, yeah, I like this.
Yeah, it's like an instant kind of interpolation of you. Yeah. But yeah, so it's like this very different setup, and like the arguments that he's having with his girlfriend Sarah are like, I guess what we get here is we don't just get the arguments, we also get him feeling really kind of like he's kind of failed at life a bit. You see him busking in the street and the cops sending him on his way. The argument about, was it about lentils or quinoa or something like that in the shops?
Yeah, and I just the line that I remember is, I know the difference between literal and figurative language, Dave.
Yeah, because he's trying to like mansplain to her where she's saying, I'm literally. He's like, I think you mean figuratively, which is that frustrating kind of, we're having an argument, you're just trying to like make me feel stupid to win.
Yeah.
But we get this, I guess, what is the setup, which is to set Dave up as a bit of a loser, who's really unhappy with where his life's going. He's just left. Well, he says he's left his girlfriend, but he's been kicked out, and he's sleeping on his sister's couch. And his sister has her son Felix, and Felix is, I would say, a pretty precocious kid.
Yeah, I have to say, a pretty amazing actor for someone that young. The way he delivers his lines right throughout this film is kind of really kind of deadpan, but comical style is really good.
Yeah. You mean where he said the naked man punched Uncle Dave in the nose because Auntie Sarah has a slutty vagina?
Slutty vagina, yes.
Oh, the conversation that kids' parents would have had to have with him Like, okay, you're about to say you cannot say this again. But we do like, it's kind of that thing where Dave's hit rock bottom, but he hasn't quite hit rock bottom, and they double down, and he goes back to propose to Sarah, and she's having sex with the real estate agent Rory, who's
Yes.
very new age, but also quite tough. I actually thought Rory was a bit sexy. Like I know
Yeah.
that they kind of picked someone, they've gone, oh, he's bald and da da da, but I don't know, he looked good. Rory had game. And poor Felix walked in with the sign for the proposal and saw Auntie Sarah having a very good time on a chair.
Exactly.
I assume that somehow they've like avoided most of the most of the traumatizing moments that kid could have had in how they've filmed that. There's a lot of shot reverse shot where you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, you're not in the same room.
No, exactly. And I do like about that scene where we get introduced. There is a constant Star Wars theme that goes
Yes.
throughout, and it's always to me a good testament to really good writing and really good directing, where you see common themes in the dialogue coming through, like the line around staying in character. It just continues right throughout the film, right up until the end, where he keeps saying to Felix, "Stay in character."
Well, it starts out as like almost a way to deflect Felix's questions, and by the end, it
Mm,
becomes a way to protect Felix from the reality of what's going on.
yeah,
That's it all something I'm sure we'll talk about. It's all about Dave's kind of character arc as he goes from this person who's lacking a bit of direction in life, goes through this quite intense experience to come out the other end as someone who's kind of found a purpose or found something to kind of drive them forward. Um, so we should say that there's this proposal. Dave catches Sarah, um, getting it on with
getting it
Rory.
on.
Ro- uh, Rory and Dave get into a bit of a scuffle, and Rory overpowers Dave. What is it? Your dick's on my arm, your sweaty dick. Like, good comedy. I mean, good comedy for us, maybe. Might be a bit lowbrow for some, but we're getting to a point where I guess something that's interesting, because he's about to meet Miss Caroline, who's Felix's teacher,
Yeah,
um, and there's this ongoing theme about Miss Caroline, because Lupita Nyong'o like is stunning, and it's like every dad on the playground has like tried it on with her,
that's
and I guess we're kind of seeing this motivation, which I find quite strange, but I guess it shows where he's at as a character, where he immediately goes, well, Sarah's dumped me. There's this beautiful woman in front of me. I'm gonna,
yeah. I'm going to go there.
well, and like in the most awkward, stupid way possible. Like he ends up on a school trip with them. Starts quoting the Bible because he hears she's a Christian.
and
Oh,
and takes a guitar with him when he had no plan of playing anything.
yes. Oh, the guitar was weird. He's like showed up. He's like, oh, I've got my guitar. You're like, okay. But it's also one of the things I found interesting. I guess this is a horror film, and we've just spent a good like 15 minutes of the film. Like the entire first act really isn't about zombies at all. Like if you
No, not at all.
an actually interesting question, because you came into this maybe not quite realizing what it was.
Yeah.
Um, when did you pick up that it was a zombie film?
I picked up on it. Well, actually, I didn't really pick up on it until after that bus trip where suddenly these American army guys pop up, and you kind of think, wait a minute, why is there an army base in Sydney? A US Army base in Sydney. What is with these really fake
These terrible
American
American accents.
accents and zombies? Like, where did zombies come out? I had gone into it kind of thinking it was just it was going
Yeah,
to be a rom com, and then suddenly
hopeless man
zombies
finds
pop up.
love kind of rom com. Yeah, it's, there are kind of two schools of thought of zombie, how to start a zombie film. Like there's the time bomb where you have that opening scene, and they like you see the zombie threat and then it cuts to whoever the protagonist is in their normal life, and you're like, "Ooh, it's
Yeah.
coming." This one, it held it off. Like we didn't know, and it eventually kind of turned into a zombie film, but it felt like it was almost like a different film that became a zombie film rather than a zombie film that had a love story in it.
Yeah, exactly.
I did find it interesting that these American soldiers that knew that there were zombies in this base, like, just didn't seem to take any precautions. So, like, the zombie had bitten this woman, one of them drove off, and the other one just turned his back.
Yeah. I did find so when I was rewatching the film, I was starting to get a little bit annoyed at the whole American um, and US base in Australia, and kind of going throughout the film. Why isn't there an Australian military? And why isn't there Australian police when there's a whole bunch of school kids being eaten by zombies? And it made me wonder: did they do this on purpose? So one, they could bring out all of the Aussieisms that you
Oh,
couldn't
you
do
mean
if it was a pure.
every soldier just listing Australian animals? There are several
Yes,
scenes where there's just
yes,
soldiers going echidnas, koala bears,
yeah.
kangaroos. I was like, there was no like there's one scene where he's just listing them, and then someone distracts him
Yeah.
with actual work, and it's like, were you just
Yeah.
sitting there listing out?
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, there are U.S. forces in Australia. Isn't there a base in Darwin where we have an
Yeah.
exchange?
It's,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's also like it just makes it makes no sense
Mhm.
that. Oh, do you know what? Actually, I wonder if part of it is that they wanted to create the army as a kind of bumbling antagonist kind of thing, and maybe they felt like doing it with the Australian army for an Australian film would be like, oh, people aren't going to be on board with that. So let's let's
Yeah.
get let's get the Americans who are not in vogue right now because they make really bad choices about leaders, and
That's exactly what what I came to is, did they pick it just so they can make fun of the Americans?
well, and I guess it adds like a nice gag to keep going back to. Those accents are terrible. I
They are.
I think it's made worse in that they have Josh Gad on this, who has a real American accent as well. So you've got someone who you're like, oh yeah, like he's a character actor, he's doing a character actor voice, but also there's like that's what an American sounds like, and then you get to these other people, and you're just like, no, oh no,
No, and I have to say, what's probably worse than the American accents is the zombie makeup.
mm.
Is It's not where they spent their budget, definitely, on this
No.
film.
No, if we knew what the budget was, that might help us make some sense of it. Although I feel like a lot of the budget would have gone onto Lupita Nyong'o and Josh Gad.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But there was a couple of other themes that came out that ran throughout the film. In those first couple of scenes, the first one was a very very Aussie thing. Well, I don't know, it's probably a thing everywhere of making fun of the fat kid.
Yes. Oh, I noticed that a few times, including when the soldier picks him up and goes, Jesus Christ. Which I find like it's one of those things. It's almost like a early noughties Adam Sandler film kind of thing to be like, oh, let's make fun of someone's weight. And
Yeah.
it's not, it's better when it's like, if you think of Eleanor Shellstrop in The Good Place, she makes fun of someone's weight and it's like, it's because she's a terrible person. In this one, you're like, oh dear, like I think we're meant to be on the side of the person being mean. Well, actually, Miss Caroline does look at him when he makes fun of the kid feeding the rabbit for being a bit big. He does get a little bit of a scolding,
Yes,
but they do run that joke a few
he
times.
does. And then when they, they do, and then he gets the big scolding when he says, "I've seen no evidence of your dad." And
Oh
yeah,
yeah, when he starts your mum joking the kids.
yes,
That's very early in his arc when he's still a bit of a douche.
No, he does. He does very well at the start. They do very well at the start of that film to make him look like an absolute ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other one that I did notice in the army barracks, which is another theme throughout the film, is that the women in the film are really good at the violence, and the men are bumbling idiots.
Yeah, that's true. They look, I think it's something. I guess if we get to they're on this farm and we meet Jimmy Giggle is there, which I found
Yes.
really interesting, and he's a total creep, as is Frogsy, the sock puppet that is his sidekick.
Yeah.
But something that we start to realize, so we should talk about how the zombies kind of. We will get to the women being really badass, but the zombie outbreak is kind of happening, and we're having all these moments of tourists who like one of them sees this zombie and decides to go get a photo with it, and then you don't see him get bitten, but you see the family freak out and like run and try and help. But I love how our protagonist and this group of kids discover the zombie because they've got the woman on the tractor doing the tour with her, like she's mic'd up and the tractor has like speakers in it so they can hear everything. And she sees a zombie eating a sheep, I think. And she
Yeah.
like walks over and her death scene is all mic'd up and kind of projected to the kids. I found it really funny. Hey mate, what are you doing? Oh my god! Like, and you hear her like dying over these speakers, and the kids are all just like, "What's going on?" But you very quickly get that Miss Caroline, played by Lupita Nyong'o, is takes this very serious kind of protective role for these kids, and there are some really good moments of that where she, like in particular, we should say like that happens. They're all running for it. Dave can't drive a tractor, but Felix knows how to because he's obsessed with tractors.
Yeah.
Keeps telling him the clutch is on the left. And they get back to this kind of souvenir shop where Jimmy, I called him Jimmy Giggles so many times.
Yeah.
I'm going to get in trouble from the ABC.
It did make me. It did make me
I think
wonder.
I've already called him Jimmy Giggle once here. I've got Jimmy Giggle written here. What is his name? Teddy McGiggle.
And we should explain for those people who don't watch children's shows that Jimmy Giggle is an Australian kids entertainer who
He's
did
like
stop.
the Blues Clues of Australia.
Yeah,
Jimmy and
exactly. And he has retired now from that. He did retire last year from that role, which also made me wonder. Is that why they used a name so similar? And was there some connection between Abe Forsyth and Jimmy Giggle and the ABC?
Quite possibly. I should have looked into it. I as I was writing out my notes, kept writing Jimmy Giggle and was just like, oh no. I'm like, Jimmy Giggle is a dick. Oh no. Jimmy Giggle's really nice, everyone. But Teddy McGiggle is a dick. And he doesn't want to let them into the souvenir hut. But Dave breaks in. They have a fight. Teddy McGiggle's crazy. And
you know what that fight reminded me of? So that fight reminded me of for Buffy fans out there. The fight reminded me of the slap fight between Xander and Harmony in in the 5th season of Buffy, because it was a very camp fight.
Yeah, no, like these are two men who've never had a proper fight in their life.
Yeah,
like they hurt each other.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Teddy McGiggle's like projectile vomiting at all different opportunities was a lot.
Yeah. and that's right, because the ball twists.
Yeah. But what we get is like Teddy McGiggle's having a breakdown, turns out is a total psycho, and this job where he has to be around children all the time, but also is getting the attention of many mothers, has like turned him into a bit of a kind of narcissist. And he's doesn't really want to help them, but they get the kids all into the shack, and he's having a bit of a breakdown, and Miss Caroline grabs a piece of broken ceramic of some kind, like a mug or something, and like like a kind of super spy kind of thing, has it like pressed against his side and is whispering to him, you know, my one thing is to protect these kids, and if you get in the way of that, I will take you out. And you're like, fucking hell, like this kindergarten teacher.
I, I wrote down in my notes in this bit, don't you wish Miss Caroline was your teacher?
Oh yeah, 100%. We should add that she also sings Taylor Swift songs with the
Yes.
ukulele, which I think is very important. Well, it ends up being this really important kind of this kind of device that they use, because the reality is, like, if you had kids in a zombie apocalypse, they'd all be dead, and this is the thing that kind of keeps them focused. And she definitely runs a tight ship, and I think they established that well as a way of like, this is how we survived, by keeping these kids in line. Like they all knew their rules, and she had ways of keeping their attention.
Exactly, it did come out as a really kind of strong theme in the film, that the kids for the most part were kind of oblivious to all this killing that's going on around them, and people being eaten, just by the fact that, you know, Miss Caroline and Dave did really well of keeping them focused on other things.
Well, and I guess we should talk about Miss Caroline being badass more. What is actually starts out as a turning point for Dave is that he isn't taking his nephew's anaphylactic allergies seriously, and gives him something with dairy in it, and Felix starts having like an allergic reaction, and is not doing okay. But they don't. Oh no, he didn't listen to how to use the bloody the
Yes,
EpiPen, and he EpiPens himself.
I know. How hard is it? Blue in the sky, orange in the thigh.
I know. I remember that. I I hope that that was like correct as well, because I feel like someone's gonna remember that one day and have to EpiPen someone. And like, if it's wrong, oh. Um, but Miss Caroline's like, well, you know, I'll go out and save him, and he has a Frogsy backpack in the back of the tractor. So she is let out, and she um braves the zombies, and is like runs to the tractor and finds many Frogsy backpacks, because all the kids are obsessed with Teddy Big Giggle. But on the way there, we get this really badass character. Like, we should add, so like lots of things happen. They build this really well, and I'm not building it very well. But Felix was playing a zombie shooting game that Dave had let him play, and so he does that reveal of, oh, you got to shoot them in the head, or chop their head off in order to kill them. So uh, Miss Caroline is fighting these four zombies that have attacked her with a shovel, and she manages to knock like slice one of their heads off, and he goes down, and she realizes, and then she very quickly takes them all out.
Excellent, and
All,
beheads all the other ones.
yeah, all off camera as well, because clearly the budget wasn't there to.
Yes, you get all these scenes of you kind of hear fighting, and then you see a head roll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah. But something, and look, something I've talked about in previous episodes is this kind of great thing about horror, is that you can do things without having to spend lots of money. It is a very accessible genre. I think lots of people think it would be a hard genre to make, but if you have a good understanding of the tropes and the formal techniques that horror makers use, you can create things without lots of effects, without lots of makeup. There are lots of ways to create a menace, and there are great horror films where you don't really see the menace. You
No,
never
and
see what's coming.
and they are the films, and because I always find that the scariest things that you can see are usually the things in your own head. So
Mm.
to me, the horror films that actually work really well are not the ones that show you all the blood and the gore and the effects. Is the ones that are actually written so well that what you imagine happening ends up being way worse than what the filmmaker could have done themselves with their budget. And that to me is kind of the really mark of a good horror film, when it just sends your imagination spiraling.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, I often feel there are horror films that are ruined by the reveal.
Mm.
And it's like
Yeah,
you could have just not shown us, and we could have filled that in and still done really well. From here, one of the big things we see is we've seen this turning point for Dave. He's starting to like take more ownership as he realizes it's his job to protect his nephew, but also all of these kids. And there's that we start to see a bit more of that human element coming in, which is something that can happen a lot in zombie films where, it's not really about zombies, it's about how people react in a zombie apocalypse.
yeah,
I think what I like about this, and something that's made it different, is that uh, having the kids there and like a big group of kids kind of changes the dynamic in a really big way that you don't often see. And they're kind of them being oblivious, like the kid that really wants to play putt putt golf and just keeps getting more and more upset that they aren't going out to play golf.
yeah.
He does that at one point. He does that thing, where like a kid of a certain age starts yelling, and the yell turns into a scream, and it just breaks you down. Uh,
But they do so well in this film, though, in just keeping that. I think going from the the horrible scenes of the zombies outside who are eating, and we probably should get back to the kids that do get eaten are the group of disabled kids who are in the farm who do get eaten and turned into zombies. But they do kind of keep doing this great mix of having these kind of intense scenes of either fights or zombies and killing, to just these scenes with the kids that just kind of totally break away from that. Like in the fight between Josh Gad and Alexander England, they go through like this massive fight, and they're throwing things at each other and throwing up and ripping Alexander's shirt off. Also a good part of that scene. And then the fight finishes, and he finally kind of struggles up to the door, and he opens the door, and Felix is just like, "Oh, hi, Uncle Dave."
that great oblivious, they're just like, "Oh, everything's fine." But I think what's good is they find ways also to keep things moving. Like there is a real risk that this had just become like it had stopped dead in its tracks, and we'd have like half an hour of like, oh my god, like why are we just following the kind of emotional turmoil of these people? They keep finding good ways to keep the plot moving. And like probably the big one is that we get this kind of Operation Hailstorm. So there's like suddenly there's a reason that everyone's going to be like, well, they have to get out of there soon, so things are going to start moving. Although we should say before that, Miss Caroline does share her own story of how she came to be in Australia, and
Yes.
she chased her favorite band. She doesn't quite reveal who it was, but it was only because she keeps playing Taylor Swift songs, and she says, and then Taylor saw me. He's like, Taylor Swift. She goes, no, Hanson. Which I just like. I'm sure there are. I mean, Hanson was very popular, but there's this idea that someone is like essentially took money that their parents had put aside for their education, hurried to Australia to break into a hotel room for fucking Taylor Hanson. Really? Alexander England is right there. But yeah, we get these beats to like understand the characters better. You start to see a bit of a like connection forming between these two, and it is ostensibly like, while it's a horror movie, it really is a rom-com. And we we do get this kind of thing to drive the plot forward in that they need to get out of there. They're running out of food, and we see that the military is going to blow everything up.
Blow everything up as the Americans do.
Yeah, very much their bag. And so I guess we get Teddy McGiggle and Dave hatching a plan to get to the McGiggle mobile.
Yes, which Teddy McGiggle thinks the plan is worthy of him getting a blowjob.
Yes. Oh yeah, and she punches him.
Punches him in the face. Yeah.
It was good. Yeah, I thought that was a really good moment as well, where it's like he was so used to just getting whatever he wanted that he just didn't even think. And this woman who had, threatened to kill him earlier, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's worth a blowjob," and you're like, "Jesus, man." We should say he's getting drunk off metho.
Yeah, and then hand sanitizer.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was hard to watch.
Yeah.
Ugh. In saying that, they go out there. Teddy McGiggle kind of goes on this rampage where he's like attacking zombie children with a swing set.
Yes.
Sliding down the slide, and you're like, just get to the truck. What are you doing?
Although I have to say, it was probably the Lupita's fight scene was a pretty good one where she beheaded the zombies. I have to say this was probably the funniest fight scene, because he was just basically going, "I fucked your mum, and I fucked your mum, and your mum."
Imagine if this was like some deep cut and actually Jimmy Giggle was like gonna say, there is no proof of that. That is not a rumor. I'm not starting a rumor. Jimmy Giggle seems very lovely. It's just unfortunate that I keep confusing the names. He does eventually get to the McGiggle mobile and gets in, locks the doors just as Dave shows up, and isn't letting him in. In fact, he like flips the bird, but just as he does, Frogsy, the hand puppet, who is treated like his own zombified character, like pokes his head through the back curtain and attacks him. And so Dave has to run for something. Oh no, Dave ends up on the top of the van. And this is where Felix goes out into the world dressed as Darth Vader.
Yes, Darth Vader. Yeah.
Treating the putt-putt golf stick as a lightsaber.
Yeah. Yes, and then using the Force to save the little baby goat.
Yeah, saves the goat. He closes the gate, except he's like using the Force, and the zombies accidentally knock the gate shut, and he's like, "Yes." That is really nice. This way that they kind of put this, in a zombie film, putting a kid in danger is kind of a bit of a no-no, but they do it in a way where, he feels like he's invincible, and he kind of is able to safely navigate them. And he ends up being the person that you're really rooting for. But he also then, because he's obsessed with tractors, gets on the tractor and knows immediately how to drive it. He's got the microphone. It's Uncle Felix and Uncle Dave. And he's driving to save Dave, who's had a call from his sister, Felix's mum, dropped his phone. She's freaking out. Felix is on his way. Dave manages to roll off the van where the zombies just weren't at the front of the van. Very convenient.
No, exactly, because they're very stupid zombies. And actually, I remember one of the lines from the fake American military, where they go, "Lucky the zombies are pretty slow," and the other officer goes, "Mm-hmm."
But we do end up with Dave getting instructions from Felix on how to drive the tractor properly, which is really good. But also we then cut to the remaining survivors inside this souvenir shop just kind of going, "Oh, I don't know what we're gonna do. There's no way out. Like, how do we survive this? Just as the tractor bursts through the wall.
First, which I have to say was a pretty irresponsible move, because how did you know there were not kids on the other side of that
Yeah,
wall?
good point. He's
Yeah.
very lucky. But we then get the slowest pursuit ever as the tractor
Yeah.
slowly goes down the road and the zombies are all kind of gathered behind, following. Honestly, this is the only part of it that didn't land for me was that I know, look, I get there's this sometimes there's like a zombies have some memory of their life before, but they're playing these songs and like the zombies are kind of singing along because they're all these childhood songs that they would know, like
Yeah.
Wheels on the Bus and all
There,
of that.
there were a few things about that end scene that were, I don't know, a bit manufactured. Like even the line from the general who
Oh yeah,
when they're coming out, it's like, no, I can't shoot kids again.
yeah. No, it didn't. Ugh. I
Yeah.
think that was the one thing that like just didn't quite land at the end of it. I should say it was still great, and one thing I there were two things I loved about this. One, there was the zombie that had echidna quills all in his face,
Yeah.
which I thought was quite nice. But also that Frogsy, there was the guy who had the Frogsy sock puppet on his hand, who was a zombie, but also
Yeah.
the Frogsy sock puppet was
Was a
itself a
zombie.
zombie. And
Yeah.
at the end, when the kids are let through and they're shooting all the zombies, the guy with Frogsy on his arm gets shot in the head, and then the next shot is Frogsy getting shot in the head. I thought like that little moment of comedy worked really well. I actually probably one of the best moments of this for me was the next scene where the general goes into the see the parents,
Yeah.
and there's all the mothers who are just like deadpan, really fed up and shitty, and not taking a bar of it. But my favorite part is when he's like, they're teachers, and one of the dads goes, Miss Caroline. And it's like it's so brief you almost miss it, but you're like, oh yeah, they just wanted one last joke about how all the dads are after her. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that. But it ends in a really lovely way. Oh, I should say that before they before they all get bundled into the van, there is a kiss between David
There
and
is a
Miss
kiss
Caroline,
and
or Audrey, as we should probably call her in that context. Um, I almost could have done without that as well. Like I get it.
yeah,
It's a rom com that's also a zombie film, but I was like,
yeah. It was a very cliche kind of you know end of disaster kiss. Two main characters getting together, and then being coupled with the bomb going off and the explosion,
oh
and
yeah,
it was yeah, kind of very very cliche.
all these people were very comfortable with what looked like a mushroom cloud.
Yes.
Uh, but the final scene, and like the reason why the kiss didn't sit well is because I think this would have been a better kind of ending for
Mm,
them. Because the
yeah.
final scene is them all in quarantine with the kids, all dressed in grey trackies, and playing Taylor Swift Shake It Off and singing to each other. And there's like this great moment of they're connecting and they're getting along really well, and all the kids are having a great time, and all the parents come in. Kat Stewart, by the way, her crying face sets me
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
I just like she walked in, she had this kind of she wasn't crying, but she was like holding back very happy tears, and I was like, that was it. I was
That was
crying.
it for that was it for me as well. Actually, and Kat does it really, really well. Yeah, I do remember her from Offspring as well. Like she can turn on the tears quite well.
It yeah, like it got me. I like look. I guess we should say it's a good zombie movie, and it
Yeah,
gives us like it is different enough to feel original in the genre.
exactly. And it's and there are what I liked about it was it's a very different style of zombie, and there have been, and you see this from some of the zombie films. There's so many zombie films out there, and they do range from kind of the really, really serious and full-on zombie apocalypse storylines to some of those really light-hearted ones, and those kind of comedic turns on the zombie storyline, and I like that this one's done really well, and I like that it's an Australian take as well, because there were some very Australian things in
Yes.
In this film. I have to say, probably my top Aussie moment in this was a Japanese tourist being chased by a zombie koala.
Yeah. Oh dear. It's so funny because it's such a thing that we all recognize.
Yeah.
Australia has this huge tourism industry, and we're very close to Asia, and so we have this really close relationship with Asian countries. I do wonder, in an American context like this, going to America, does that translate for them, or do they?
Mm.
Because there is a thing like Australia, the way that we kind of engage with those things, I think in an American context might seem harsher than we would see it. You know?
Yeah, I think uh, there are some things in this that I don't know how well they would translate to an American audience. Like some of the stuff happening, especially in the first few scenes before they kind of get to the farm, and some of the lines that they've says, like even when he's walking through the schoolyard, and he says, even the retarded kid is bullying you.
Oh
And so some of those lines that you kind of think you'd probably get that as an
This doesn't land here anymore as well. Like,
yeah.
it's one of those things. I think it only works because we're meant to think that Dave is a douchebag. Like,
Yeah.
and I think if that was to be played out as like a serious kind of, we're making fun of that kid, I don't know if like we're making fun of Dave in that moment rather than the kid, and I think that's the key difference. But it's also the thing that maybe doesn't translate.
Yeah.
No, it's I as a film, I genuinely laughed a lot during this. I think it had a really nice balance between the horror and the comedy. Oh, I should also add, the credit song was Mbop.
Mbop, yes.
But they really thought about it, and everything was well thought out in it. I think is probably a really important thing to add.
A couple of things about the credits. Since you brought up the credits, I noticed that so Alexander Ringland and Josh Gad had stunt doubles. Lupita didn't.
Really?
So she did that fight scene herself.
That's so interesting. I guess they had more like getting crap like thrashed around, and like they were fighting each other. But still, like, I mean, I guess her Black Panther kind of training probably.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't need a stunt double. Do I have to jump out of a plane? What? Look, I do have some questions to help us wrap up this. What's the campus line or moment of this film for you?
So I can't get past the fight between Teddy McGiggle and
Dave.
Yeah. Because it was such a camp fight, except for the other campus moment in the film was when Dave is helping Teddy McGiggle onto the roof of the souvenir shop, and Teddy McGiggle does the ass grab.
I feel like I missed that entirely.
Where he's kind of coming up and he just puts his hand on Dave's ass, and I'm like, you actually did not need to do that to pull yourself up.
No, that was a choice. Is there a scariest moment for you?
Um, I can't say that there is a scariest moment in this film, so I'm going to go with instead the best kill scene, and that was Teddy McGiggle getting killed by a zombie frog puppet.
Yeah, no, that was pretty good. It is one of those ones like it. I don't know. Like I never often for zombie films, like you get scared when you feel like there's danger or that you can't see a way out of it, and I just never quite had that feeling. Um,
No, the only closest thing that I got to being scared for someone or something was uh, fearing that the little baby goat was going to get eaten.
oh yeah, no, that was scary. The poor goat.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, so we do have a camp scary scale. Um, this is a scale of 1 to 7. From Divine Camp is number 1, Pure Terror is number 7. It's a scale of classification, not a scale of value. But I would like to know, where would you put this film on the camp scary scale?
Considering this film starts with Tay Tay, as they call her, and singing her song and ends with Mbop, I'm going to put it at the very camp scale
So
of a
number
one.
1, Divine Camp.
Yes.
Look, I think it does work that way. I think that there are lots of people who would say, "Oh, I don't do horror films," but they could probably watch this and not
Yeah.
really. There's never a moment where you'd be like, "Oh my god, I can't!" Like I'm on the edge of my seat.
Mm.
I think it very much is leaning into the campness of it rather than trying to lean into the horror.
Exactly, and it just kind of shows, I think, how diverse the horror genre is, and how much it kind of crosses over with other genres as well. Because there's generally other themes in horror stories, whether they a lot of times it is love,
Mm,
or coming of age, or in a drama, definitely action thriller. Um, and there is a lot of crossover in the horror genre. Can be for everyone in that sense. It's not just blood and gore.
mm. No, absolutely. I think the whole reason I have this podcast is that horror is a very broad church, and there are lots of people who say they don't like horror at all, but actually when you delve into it, there is a form of horror in their life, whether it's the Addams Family or Gremlins, or it's
Mm,
you know trying to think of Freddy, could be Jason, it could be Michael Myers. Like there is horror in people's lives, and people, it's like talking about sort of how it exists on this scale is all about showing that it's it plays this really big cultural role for a lot of people,
mm,
and we all engage with it
exactly.
differently.
And you can tell that, and this might be reading too much into this film, but um, horror plays to our biggest fears. And a lot of the zombie films do focus on what are things that people fear, and how can we bring them to life. You look at this film, Dave's biggest fear at the start of this film was not zombies; it was having kids.
Hmm.
And by the end of this film, he goes through that big arc where he's come to terms with actually, really liking and enjoying having kids around.
Yeah, and he realizes that because we didn't really talk about this, but there's an arc for him where he talks about his own absent father and his worry that he would be an absent
Mm,
father too. And at the beginning of the film, he was like his father. He wasn't someone who was present in the relationship, and maybe didn't see that he was doing that himself. Uh, so yeah, it deals with lots of things on lots of levels. This is why we love horror as a genre.
yes, exactly.
Well, Dave, I want to say thank you for joining me. But before we go, do you have anything you want to plug?
I do. I do have something that I do want to plug. So I'm also on the board of the Melbourne Queer Film Festival. So I would say do follow the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, because we always have some really great films, and there's also always some good horror films in that lineup as well. So follow us at MQFF on Twitter or Melbourne Queer Film Fest on Facebook and Instagram.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I can attest I've been to many a Melbourne Queer Film Festival, and there's always some really good stuff there, including some very good horror. Thanks again for joining us. You can follow Camp Scary Squee on Instagram or Twitter by going to @CampScaryPod. If you have questions or suggestions, email campscarysquee@gmail.com and make sure to rate and review Camp Scary and Squee so that other horror fans can find us. Thank you for joining us, and remember, don't scream.
They'll hear you.